All right, here we go. Welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday afternoon. Trying to keep these days straight. They're going so fast, it seems like. Thank you for joining us for our session around accelerating foundational skills with research-based instruction session here. Emily and I are going to be your hosts, but we do have a group of panelists that will be joining us here in just a few minutes, and we'll introduce them as we get to that. So you'll see some of them here on the screen as well. And you'll also see some of our colleagues that are monitoring our chat box, like I mentioned earlier. But during this webinar, we will share a bit of information about SIPPS and what it is. And then we're going to hear from our panel of educators who are implementing SIPPS. So you get to hear a little bit about their journey and how they're using SIPPS to really effectively support student mastery of foundational skills. So we're looking forward to hearing from them here in just a second. So as we get started, please feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourself, tell us where you are, what you do, all the good things, and use the chat box to ask questions and provide any thoughtful insights that you have along the way as well. So just a little bit about us for some of you that might be new to the work that we do here at the Collaborative Classroom. Our organization is a nonprofit organization, and we are mission driven, and our work across the country has really helped transform classrooms and teacher practice by offering continuous professional learning and really amazing literacy resources grounded in social emotional learning practices and all the good things to create these collaborative classrooms and build community in our classrooms. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about SIPPS, which helps provide really this opportunity to engage students in an intervention program that's really respectful of their learning needs. And Emily Kermitas and I will be your hosts today on this really quick journey. But like I mentioned earlier, we have some panelists that will be joining us here in just a minute. And we also have some friends from our team that will be monitoring the chat box as well. So our goals today are to really help introduce you to the SIPPS resources that will best support your students in K-3. That includes the SIPPS beginning, extension, and challenge levels. We'll learn a little bit more about how we might accelerate the learning of these foundational skills through SIPPS in this approach. And then I'm going to stop talking so I can turn it over to the panelists really quickly, because we're going to want them to share their experience with this journey and what led them to looking for a type of program that helps accelerate these foundational skills learning. So on the chat box, I have a few friends, Trisha, Don, Katie, Megan, and Tamara, that are going to be sharing links and answering questions and keeping the chat box moving. So you might notice them pop in and out throughout our session. And again, we will have some of our panelists joining us here in just a minute. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Jackie and Stacy and Susanna about how they came to find SIPPS and what that's meant for their district and how they're working through this type of program in just a few minutes. But I thought we'd start with just a quick intro to what is SIPPS, and that can lead us into more of a bigger discussion around how it might help your students. Okay, and so our panel of friends will introduce themselves here in just a few minutes. Okay. So I'd like for you to take a look at our description here of the SIPPS program. SIPPS stands for the Systematic Instruction in Phonics, in Phonological Awareness, Phonics, and Sight Words. But it is a systematic, differentiated foundational skills program that helps develop the word recognition, strategies and skills that enable students to become fluent and confident readers and writers. And so the outcome of SIPPS is always hopefully to become independent, fluent readers, which we know they can do through this type of work by really honing in on being able to help them read with accuracy and automaticity. So I'd like for you just to take a second and reread that description. And in the chat box, I'd love for you to share any words that resonate with you here. See the word differentiated comes up a couple of times. Fluent and confident. Confident is always a word that we want to hear about students as readers, right? Systematic. Great. Independent. Oh, yes. So I want you to keep in mind the outcome of the SIPPS program, because we really want to stay focused on how we develop independent readers who read with accuracy and automaticity as we talk about SIPPS. Okay. All right. Thank you. So this program, I always like to highlight this, was done through the work of our friend, Dr. Scheffelbein. He was a professor at the Department of Teaching Education at California State University, where he taught lots of classes in language and literacy and beginning reading and children's lit and all that really admirable work that he did in that field. But I think what really always resonates with me is that Dr. Scheffelbein was a dyslexic himself. And it was from his experiences and the work that he was doing with pre-service teachers that really led to creating a program that helps support students through a rigorous, systematic approach and supporting teachers along the way to really developing those early reading skills. So I think that says a lot about the type of work that we're using with students and how we know that it's grounded not only in research, but also the experience of teachers and fellow teachers who themselves were dyslexic and, were really looking to service students in a way that supports that type of learning. Okay. So I'm going to invite you to take a look at this quote from a recent blog that we shared on our site here from some of my colleagues about kind of changing the mindset maybe this year. In previous years, we've really focused on the remediation of students and how we can focus on past learning and maybe slowing down the pace to really help get them where they need to be. But after the last year and a half, we know that we can't waste time. Not that we were wasting time before by any means, but we just don't have the time to really, go back and kind of think about those things. So we really got to change our mindset to this acceleration. So I want you to think about acceleration of learning and how it's different from remediation here. So remediation often focuses on past learning and usually at a slower pace. Remediation often assumes that students need more time or skills broken down into smaller chunks. Acceleration, on the other hand, understands that time cannot be wasted. If students are not where they need to be or where we want them to be with particular skills, acceleration helps us consider how we make that ground up faster. So my friends here in the chat box will share a link to this blog here in just a second so that you can go and read it when you have a few free minutes. I know how that is, but when you do have a few free minutes. But I really want you to kind of keep in mind how we might change this mindset, and SIPPS might help us do that as we think about accelerating learning and really meeting students at their point of need to get them where they need to be. Okay. Oops. So how does SIPPS help support that accelerative nature of instruction? So we're going to learn a little bit more about how the SIPPS program supports and accelerates student learning. The program has an accelerative scope and sequence that allows us to really make sure that we're moving across that continuum to provide that type of instruction that is systematic. It's differentiated, so we're going to meet students right at their point of need. It's based on research, and we know from research that there are a lot of great instructional practices out there that are highly effective in what we do in teaching these early reading skills. And we also know that we're going to have to support teachers along the way because some of us didn't learn to teach reading this way. And so we're kind of going into this in a different, from a different avenue, and we might need a little extra support. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well through the SIPPS program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a quick video, just a couple-minute video of the SIPPS program across the levels so that you can really get a big picture of what the program's all about and how it's set out throughout the levels. So let's see if this is working. And if anything is acting funky, my team here will help me make sure that we can get it up and running. Okay, so here we go.
To ensure that all students grow into engaged, independent, and thoughtful readers, the nonprofit Center for the Collaborative Classroom embarked on a decades-long partnership with the late Dr. John Scheffelbein to develop SIPPS, Systematic Instruction in Phonological Awareness, Phonics, and Sight Words. SIPPS is a mastery-based, multi-level program that develops word recognition strategies and skills necessary for reading success. You can use SIPPS two different ways: as an intervention in grades 1 through 12, or as a core foundational skills program at kindergarten through grade 3.
These are high frequency words. Read them across again.
SIPPS accelerates student learning by strategically assessing where students are at and placing them in the program right at their point of need. Taking a structured literacy approach, SIPPS guides learning within and across 3 levels with a focus on teaching foundational skills to mastery. SIPPS beginning level focuses on consonant sounds and short vowels. Children learn to read one-syllable words by blending the sounds represented by the letters. In SIPPS extension level, students begin identifying and analyzing spelling patterns. They learn long and complex vowel sounds and begin to recognize that many of these are represented by more than one spelling. The third phase, SIPPS challenge level, develops strategies for decoding and spelling polysyllabic words to read by syllables using affixes, roots, and the 6-syllable types. For older readers, SIPPS Plus uses age-appropriate, high-interest materials for students in grades 4 through 12 who are reading at a first or second grade level. The instruction in SIPPS is data-driven. Teachers observe students during the lessons and utilize mastery tests to determine whether to move students forward, reteach, or adjust the pace of instruction. When your assessment data indicates that students need even more support, we've created the intensive multisensory instruction for SIPPS component to support them. SIPPS transforms reading for students. Every time they read a new book, they experience the pleasure that comes with success. And as their confidence grows, they find themselves wanting to read more and more. SIPPS unlocks the world of the written word and sets the foundation for a life of reading.
All right. So I thought that was just a helpful, quick 3 minutes. I'm not good about doing that in 3 minutes, but just a really quick overview of what is SIPPS. And so now that you have kind of a general idea, I want to really hit on those 4 areas that we talked about and how SIPPS can help support and accelerate student learning. And I want to start, and I'm going to do this kind of quickly just to go through this so that I can turn it over to the panelists. But I do want to start with the idea of this accelerative scope and sequence that really focuses on the mastery and the application of foundational skills. That includes phonological awareness, teaching spelling sounds and high frequency words, to really be able to do that work. And so we use this phonics continuum, and I love this graphic because it really lays out how the levels fit into each of these parts of the continuum, all grounded in the research that we know around how students develop across that continuum. So we know that our students that are in that simple alphabetic phase are really focusing on these areas of working on those single consonants and the short vowels and identifying beginning and middle ending sounds and starting to learn those early consonant vowel consonant words. And so we work with them within that beginning level to really focus and be able to practice those early alphabetic skills. And then our students, as they move forward into that across that continuum, they begin to work in that more complex spelling pattern phase, where they're working on inflectional endings and R-controlled vowels and consonant blends and long vowels and all of those things that put a lot of extra sophistication on the text that they're reading. And then we hope that these students, as they begin to build this really strong foundation, move into that polysyllabic morphemic phase where they're able to really break down parts of words, understanding the different syllable types, how to attack these bigger words that they're encountering in text, because they have that strong foundation from those earlier skills in that simple alphabetic and that vowel pattern, spelling pattern phase. So it all kind of works together to be able to accelerate that learning because we are ensuring that we're moving across in a really systematic approach to doing that. And we do that by starting with a placement assessment that determines where students are along that continuum. So we know the importance of differentiating, and we talked about that with the keynote spoke about that as well. And that's probably something that you've been hearing over and over again as you come back to school for these first few weeks this fall, because we know how important that work is. And so that placement assessment helps us determine, okay, where are they? Where are they on that continuum so that we can place them into groups with other students that are about at that same place to be able to move them along. And by doing that, we can accelerate their learning because we know exactly where they are and what they need and where to go from there. Okay. So we've discussed that accelerated scope and sequence, as well as the differentiation and putting students at their point of need. But we also recognize that this importance of research. There's a lot of research out there, and sometimes we're catching up with some of it, even though it's been around for a while. But we recognize that there are several, I should say, essential elements to instruction that ensure that students can really learn and move across that continuum. So we lean on the science of reading and research to identify these essential elements. And we know that it's important to focus on that systematic scope and sequence, that differentiated instruction, but also the use of a structured literacy approach, explicit instructional routines, ongoing progress monitoring that allows us to make decisions along the way to ensure that students are making progress. And if not, what do we do to help get them where they need to be? And then, of course, providing cumulative learning that leads to mastery. So we know that these essentials are in place that need to be in place, and that's kind of a heavy lift. My friends are adding in the, we'll add in the chat box a link to the brief from the ILA literacy leadership brief from a couple years ago that really helps us kind of consider these essential elements so that, again, when you have a free moment, you can take a look at that. But we really lean on pulling together that research to see what that is and how that works. And so we're going to kind of dig in here a little bit to the structured literacy approach that SIPPS takes across the lessons. And we will do that through a structured approach that allows these elements that we were mentioning earlier to really work across those continuum. So we'll always be teaching those phonological awareness skills, those phonics skills, and those sight words. But we'll also be allowing the students or providing the opportunity for them to practice and apply that work through guided spelling and the reading of connected text throughout each lesson. And we know how important that is. If students don't have the opportunity to practice these skills, then how can we ensure that they're really learning what we're teaching along the way, right? And there's no better practice for reading than actual reading. So we recognize how important that is. And so we'll do that through explicit instructional routines. These routines are teacher directed, but the students are really doing the work in these lessons. So we have routines for teaching phonological awareness, phonics, and sight words, as I mentioned. And these routines will include modeling, teacher-student dialogue, practice within the group, and these corrective routines that we offer if students, make an error at the table, we can fix it up before they walk away with any misunderstandings. And so we have to ensure that throughout these lessons, the instruction is clear. We want these routines to be predictable and consistent so students can kind of take that lift off their plate and really just focus on the learning. We cut all that extraneous teacher talk. We really want to make this concise. We want to give them the language that they need to be better readers and to be able to take those skills and apply them to their actual reading. And we're going to guide the students to respond orally in every lesson so that we ensure that they're not only engaged, but we can also hear and really hone in on, as we talked about, there was a lot of chatter in the chat box in the keynotes about being a kid watcher. What are they doing and how are they doing it? And what do we need to maybe make clear or help to fix up for them? So each of those lessons will include those explicit routines that allow us to do that work. And SIPPS instructions and materials are all designed to help create that independent reader and writer in students. And so we will monitor, assess, and we'll assess along the way. We'll use that data to really drive our instruction. We want to, I think this was in the chat box earlier too, we don't want to plow through and leave any students behind, but we really want to hone in on what are they doing and how are they using these skills that we've taught. What do they need more help with, or maybe just need some extra time with before we move on to that next skill that's so important? That foundation has to be really strong to be able to develop those readers and writers. And so we do that in a couple ways. I mentioned the guided spelling, but also through the verification of text. Each lesson allows for the students to read through a text that might be vocabulary controlled for the phonics and sight words that we're teaching, so that we can observe those skills in practice and see how they're doing with them. Use those corrective routines to ensure that they're not walking away with any misunderstandings, but really honing in on those skills. And then we can use that time when they're reading to really listen. Are they applying those skills? And what's the next step for this student? And so you'll notice these are the stories, or these are the books that we use for beginning and extension, but our challenge students actually read from their own self-selected text. We want this to be as authentic as possible. So we teach these skills, and as they become in that stage of reading where they're really putting these skills to use, we want them to do it in authentic text that they're really reading. I think that's a really important part of the work that SIPPS does. And so here you'll notice, as we continue along those essential elements, that idea of cumulative learning that leads to mastery. We really want to make sure that they're learning all of these skills along the way, along that phonics continuum. And so they can really build that solid foundation that I was mentioning earlier. So you'll notice here are the skills that they'll be learning across the beginning and extension levels. And here are the skills they'll be learning in that challenge level. So lots of work going into these SIPPS levels. Okay. So we know that we all might need some support as we work through something like this. If we're going to use an accelerative scope and sequence, we're going to differentiate, we're using all of the research that's coming at us, we might need some support in that work. And so we know that our SIPPS resources are educative and that they're helping develop us as better reading teachers. We'll learn a lot through it as well, especially those of you that might not have had a phonics background like me. That just was not how I learned back in the day. So throughout the program, there is professional learning resources in the actual print resources and on our learning portal that can help support that work as well. Also, pieces in there that just teacher notes that kind of think about and help us consider what students might be struggling with or having issues with, and how we might be able to support them. So there are a lot of resources in the SIPPS program that help us do that work as well. So that was a really quick overview of SIPPS and what it is and what it has to offer. But I think it's really important to hear from educators that are using SIPPS and how it's helping their students accelerate learning, and how it's helping their districts really focus on the science of reading and teaching those really specific foundational skills that are so important. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend Emily, my co-host here, who's going to get us rolling and facilitate our discussion with the panel.
Well, Maria, thank you so much. And thank you for providing that high level. I'm really, really glad for that.
High level.
So a ways back, Maria had a slide in which she was introducing you to our panelists, but allow me to do that again. We are joined today by Jackie, who is the Director of Elementary Curriculum in Woodstock Community School District 200. We're also joined by Stacy Franklin, District Coordinator of Literacy Performance in the Franklin School District in Peyton, Colorado. And finally, we are joined by Susanna Hogan, Early Reading Intervention Instruction Specialist, Richmond Public Schools. Thank you so much, educators, for lending your voice and experience to our panel today. We're really glad to have you. So first question I'd like to start with, you're more than your names and your titles. I'd love for you to tell us about your district and tell us about the learners in your district. And Jackie, let's start with you this time.
Hello, everyone. I am in Woodstock, which is in Illinois. We are a consolidated school district, so we are pre-K through 12th grade. However, we're really using SIPPS in our elementary buildings. And we're about 35% Hispanic in our district, and about 2/3 of our students are in a dual language program. So 50% of their day is spent in English and 50% of their day is spent in Spanish. And then the rest of our students are monolingual students and in our monolingual traditional program.
Thank you so much. Stacy, how about your district?
So in Colorado Springs, Colorado, District 49 is currently the second largest district in town. Today, it might be the largest district tomorrow or Friday. We kind of go back and forth. We have about 25,000 students total pre-K to 12th grade. We have 20 elementary schools. 14 of those are district operated schools. 6 of those are charters. And so we have a very diverse population. We cover 133 square miles. We have over 30 languages in addition to English within our school district, and a large population of military families. And so we're fairly transient. And at this point, we've utilized SIPPS in the vast majority of our elementary schools. And I'll speak a little bit more to that as we continue.
Thank you. And Susanna.
Hi, thank you. I work in Richmond City Public Schools in Richmond, Virginia. We have 44 schools all total, 26 elementary schools, which I support. We are, an inner city district. We have a lot of needs. We have a lot of growth potential that we're very excited to be able to address this year. Overall, our students, our teachers, our learners are all ready to learn. It's just we have not had our reading scores improve in a while. So COVID really gave us a kick too. So we have to work on that.
Thank you for sharing, everyone. So I want to get right into our questions for you. First, I'm wondering what intervention looked like prior to your SIPPS implementation. How did the science of reading research play a role in selecting and implementing curricular resources? I saw Mary posing questions in the chat about all the options that are out there. So we're wondering what it looked like before and how you came to SIPPS. And this time, Susanna, can we start with you?
Sure. I would say that SIPPS has kind of bubbled up from, we had a couple of spots where folks had started it. We have a wide variety of supports in our buildings, from early intervention assistants, instructional assistants, tutors. And so we started using SIPPS to give them a strategic, explicit tool to use during the intervention time. Then it naturally progressed through some teams and some schools. So this year it's in all of our elementaries K-5. So we are, all in and all hands on deck on that. But the reason is as we were transitioning from a balanced literacy approach to a, structured literacy, science of reading based practices, our background knowledge wasn't necessarily there. So when we identified SIPPS as a great tool because of the educative process of it, and then as well as it was great how the speakers talked earlier, like sometimes you have how much time do you have, right? And so with minimal time, how can we be the most impactful? So that's why we went to SIPPS.
Thank you. And Stacy, I know data was really important for your district. Can you speak a little bit about your process?
So I will just say my experience with SIPPS goes back about 15 years to the first edition. And I taught SIPPS first in a neighboring district. And when I moved into District 49 about 7 years ago, I spoke very highly of SIPPS, and the building that I was working in at the time had kind of plateaued in terms of data. And so they were looking for something to really meet the needs of our kids that had the deepest skill deficits, and then also kind of promote that accelerated growth. And so within that building, we implemented SIPPS, and in a very short period of time, about the first year, frankly, other buildings took notice and said, what's happening there? We had the highest levels of growth and achievement 3 years running within that building. And I really credit SIPPS for the movement that we saw. And I will also say in Colorado, we are fortunate to have an approved list of programming that has been vetted by the Colorado Department of Education. And I was not surprised when SIPPS was approved for that list. And so that kind of just reiterated the practices that were happening, and it allowed for schools to utilize some state funding for the purchase of SIPPS that may not have necessarily been an option in years previously.
Thank you. And Jackie, how about your district's process?
We started our journey into learning about the science of reading about the same time that we found SIPPS. A neighboring district and colleague that I had worked with formerly was implementing SIPPS in their district. And so I went to watch it there, and it really aligned with the learning that we were doing. And so we have many interventions that we were using in our district pre-SIPPS, and some are still used and some are not. Really, we're really thinking about the needs of all of our learners, right? Because everything provides a different need for our students. And so we implemented SIPPS, and I'll talk a little bit, I think, later about how everybody uses it, and our teachers, as they were using it, SIPPS really started to accelerate their learning into the structured literacy and science of reading approach, because they saw how it was working for the students they were using it with and asked to use it with more and more students along the way. So it kind of just accelerated its own growth within our district.
Thank you so much. So next, I'm wondering, what does the SIPPS implementation look like in your district? And Stacy, can we start with you?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we implemented SIPPS within a building I worked in about 7 years ago. And it's hard to argue with results. You know, data tells the story, and the numbers speak. And so within our district has kind of a unique structure in the sense that we have zones. And so within that zone, the other schools in that zone then implemented SIPPS and saw very similar growth and achievement patterns. And then over the course of the last 7 years, other schools have just continued to implement to the point where we really have a fairly solid, consistent implementation, probably in about 18 or 19 of our 20 elementary schools. It may not be a K-3 implementation. It might be maybe a K-1 implementation or a 1-2. But SIPPS is being utilized in the vast majority of our buildings. And it's been a process. And it's also, I would also say, the explicit systematic instruction within SIPPS is highly aligned with the professional learning that we have offered to our teachers. And so it's been really a great way for teachers across the district to have conversations about best practice and effective instruction and efficient instruction. Thank
you. What might our other panelists add about the implementations in your district? Susanna, I saw you nodding. What was the connection you made?
I think it's the professional learning, all at once, that we're, encompassing multiple aspects in our district, right? From leadership to teachers. We have early intervention assistants, like I mentioned, who focus specifically on K-3 reading intervention to support teachers. So as we're building our background knowledge and our expertise, everything the research shows us, right? We need it's structured and explicit. And so they are understanding why we have SIPPS, so they don't have to create their own material. So that has been a bonus for them as well.
Thank you. Next, I'm wondering who teaches and who receives SIPPS. And how has the implementation impacted teacher practice? Jackie, let's start with you, and you can tell us about your interventionist.
Right. So everybody teaches it and everybody receives it to give a simple answer. So we actually use the placement test. So if we give our universal screener to everybody, and anybody that is showing that they are below benchmark gets our SIPPS placement test. And so then anybody that needs SIPPS gets it. We have, I didn't mention earlier, we have 6 elementary buildings, 1 early learning center, and all of them use SIPPS and follow that same assessment practice. And so we have 2 reading interventionists at every building. We also have RTI associates or paraprofessionals that help to deliver SIPPS. Our classrooms teachers do, kind of in that all hands on deck approach. So whoever shows by the placement tests that they need SIPPS gets it, and anybody that needs to deliver it delivers it and gets that training and that support either from me or from another teacher that is delivering it, or the interventionist or coaches in the district. So really it's everyone.
Thank you. And Susanna, I've heard about your all hands on deck.
Yeah.
I know that there really takes a structure in order for that to be successful. You can't just up and do that once the year's started. Can you tell us about your process?
It does. Our whole district, from our superintendent to everybody this year, our motto is our focus is literacy. And so they have committed in our elementary schools, giving us 45-minute of a targeted specific intervention block outside of any core instruction, and which is staggered throughout the day so that the support personnel can go, right? So it's not everyone doing it at the same time, but all of 5th grade is doing it at the same time, all of 4th grade. And so ideally we would be using a walk to read model, but obviously we're not moving classrooms around and smushing our kiddos together too much. So it's more of a flood in. We've, hired additional contracted tutors, additional IAs, EIAs. We have all of our teachers, our ESL, exceptional ed. We are looking at the whole grade holistically and then making the decision. So screening, just like Jackie's doing in her district, but then, planning out who will do what. And we match, the highest needs students with our highest skilled highest skilled educators. And this year we also have a reading interventionist in every building, in addition to a reading coach, which is huge for us. We've had, one or both in some of our schools, but every elementary now, again, this commitment to literacy has a coach and an interventionist. So we're supporting, both the teacher instruction and then the students who need us the most.
Thank you. Right. So I'm wondering about impact. Tell us about student achievement, confidence, and motivation. Let's start with Stacy.
So again, I would say it's really difficult to argue with data when you see the impact of SIPPS on achievement, on both growth and achievement. So growth for our most struggling learners, and then achievement overall, and not just achievement over a single school year, but a deeper mastery of skills. So we pay very close attention to our regression. We're on a modified year-round schedule, and so our summer is shorter than many other districts. And so we are very quick to, at the beginning of the year, just like these other ladies said, based upon our Acadians benchmarking, we identify our students that are at risk, and we immediately place them into groups, into skill-based intervention groups. And so I would just say what we've seen over the course of time is in those buildings where SIPPS has been implemented the longest, we've seen the deepest mastery, and we've seen the least amount of regression.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to head on to our next question. I'm wondering, we have all these prospective SIPPS users here wanting to learn about this. What lessons have you learned in your SIPPS journey, and what resources do you find most helpful? And Jackie, let's start with you this time.
I'm going to start with the resources first. There are so many resources that we find useful. Maria talked about the lesson plan. So just the lesson plan within itself, every entry lesson. So like in beginning, that's every 10 lessons, has an very explicit, this is the correction feedback, this is how you introduce this. All of those routines are very explicitly in there for the teacher as well. And then along with those lessons, digitally or in the print, there's always a little QR codes that you can just scan, and it brings you to the video of the routine for that lesson. That's really helpful. Before, like I said, we have associates, our paraprofessionals that are delivering it. So really quick videos. This is the routine for this. These are the materials for this. So those are just built in throughout the program, which is, those are great resources for professional learning. And then, there's webinars that have been available. We're lucky enough at our implementation that we had pre-COVID, trainers, come out to us and really be able to train all of our original implementators. So just so many resources at your fingertips to start implementation. And then, as you get along with that, just reminders of the routine to look at those little videos to remind you.
Thank you. And how about Stacy?
So I would say first and foremost, as I've trained teachers, my focus on what is really impactful has kind of shifted. So the placement assessment that's embedded in SIPPS that identifies specifically where kids need to enter is critical. And I would never encourage anyone to underestimate the impact of that. The other thing I would say is one of the advantages to SIPPS are the mastery tests after every about 8 to 10 lessons. Those are great formative checks to let you know whether students have made the gains and mastered the skills that they really need to know in order to continuously be successful. And those align very closely with our progress monitoring. And then I would also say early on, in an attempt to maybe kind of trim time, we cut out the guided spelling. And I would highly discourage anyone from doing that, because that encoding piece is really impactful in terms of the deep mastery. So those are the 3 big takeaways in terms of just the instructional pieces.
Thank you. And Susanna, I know that mastery tests have been important to you, but there was another tool that you wanted to share out.
Yes, so the learning portal is my go-to, and we have some of our students are attending school virtually, and last year we were all virtual, and so SIPPS was virtual. So the greatest part that I love is that everything is available digital and print. So actually, when we were walking through classrooms the other day, we see teachers, sharing digital resources on their smartboard while standing up, maintaining social distance. And then also we see teachers working in a small group, using those print materials as well. So there's a variety of ways that you can access all of the students that you need to. And so that's one of our favorite. And then the other part is that the materials are the same. So if you are in the beginning kit, it's the same sound cards, the same familiarity into the extension kit, into the, everything goes together. So it's not like 3 different things. Everything matches and just builds. So that's what we also like. It's easier for our interventionists because it's not 3 different things. It's just one thing, but just the lessons are varied.
Thank you so much. I want to thank this incredible panel for sharing your experience and learning. And your words of warning, Stacy. With that, I want to see what participants are taking away from our time together. So Maria and I have a question for you as we conclude our time. Go ahead and make sure that you're writing to everyone, because we want to glean from each other. How might the SIPPS program support your work in accelerating student progress for your youngest readers? And we're asking about youngest readers because you're invited to stick with us and talk about 412 in just a little bit. So let's see what's coming in that way. And then finally, educators, we wanted to extend some invitations to you. So no doubt you're wondering, well, I'd like to learn more. I've seen in the chat, where can I see this? And so we would encourage you to download a SIPPS lesson. Our colleagues are going to add some links now so that you can find where to go to download a SIPPS lesson. Also, we just heard Susanna talk about the importance of the learning portal. And that's where you have digital access to all of your print resources, or your will be print resources. And in the interim, you could have a 60-day trial where you could get to check all of that out. It's a very supportive tool. And so if you check out the chat, there are some links that are coming in for you to follow there, and continue to add your thoughts to our question about how you could see SIPPS being supportive of you. And with that, I want to thank everyone for your time and your robust use of the chat. This has been a really engaging session, and we've been so fortunate to have these educators with us sharing their experience. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you in the rest of the symposium.